Alright guys, we're back for part 2 of my soap making tutorial. I have pre-measured and have everything prepped here. So in this green bowl we have our olive oil. This is actually the main ingredient in the soap that I make here. In this container we have our coconut oil and shea butter melted down. So anytime that you're using an oil that is more in a solid format like coconut and shea, you need to melt it down before you mix it into your other oil. So here I'm going to pour it into our olive oil. Once we get that poured in, I'm going to just mix that up so that oils are evenly dispersed. Now we are ready to check the temp. So remember, you can use a digital thermometer, something like this one, and I'm just going to check to make sure we're below 140. And we are at 85 degrees. The reason that it was warm is because I had to melt those oils. Our next step is going to be checking our lye. So as you saw in my previous video, lye is a white powder form when you get it. For soap making, you have to mix it with water. So it's very important that you pour the lye into the water and not vice versa. So I've already gone ahead and done that. So we just have our lye and water mixture here. Now when you pour the lye into water, it gets really hot, almost to boiling. So I'm just gonna check the temp here. And we're at 131. So it is cool enough to begin our process. We could wait if we wanted to, but I'm gonna go ahead and move on to our next step. So we're gonna take our oil blend and our lye blend, get these ready. I have my emulsion or stick blender handy, ready to go. So we're going to just tap that down, kind of tap it out, make sure the air bubbles are gone. And we're gonna begin pouring our lye into the oil. You'll notice I'm not gonna start blending yet at this point. So we're just gonna pour the lye. And I try to pour it over the stick portion of the blender to make sure there's not as many air bubbles formed. So you just wanna slowly pour that in. And then we can start blending. So you wanna just pulse the blender on a low speed. And I'm gonna try to angle this so you guys can see the change here once we start blending. So you notice it's starting to turn to this white color. That's how we know that the lye is mixing in with the oils. And you can see it's very liquidy right now. We wanna keep blending until we get to a somewhat thick trace is what it's called, and I'll show you what that looks like once we hit it. So let's keep blending. So I can see that it's starting to thicken up a little bit, and now I'm gonna add my essential oils. So I've pre-blended the lavender and patchouli essential oil here, and I'm just gonna pour that right in. So let's keep blending. Now, depending on what design you wanna make, you might want your soap to come to a thicker trace or a more liquidy trace. So for the design I'm gonna do today, I want it to be pretty thick, so we're gonna keep blending. All right, you can see it's definitely getting thicker, but it's not quite where I want it yet, so we're gonna go a little bit longer. A really great way to check where your trace is you lift your stick blender and you kind of let it fall, and you see if it leaves a mark behind. So I feel like I'm at a pretty good point here, so I'm gonna go ahead and stop blending. We still have to add our pigment and color into the soap, so we do have to blend it a little bit more once we get to that point. So I'm going to separate this out into different containers so that we can mix our colors. So that's where these containers come in really handy. I'm gonna go ahead and split this out. You don't want to fill it up too much because you need some space to be able to mix the color. Now I know for this loaf I want it to mostly be purple. So I'm going to use more for my purple, but less for the yellow. So this will be my yellow, and I can mix my purple in the big container here. Okay, so I showed you earlier the pigments that I use. I just wanted to show you guys what they look like open. They're very beautiful. So these are the two colors we're going to use today. For the purple, I did mix a little bit of the alkanet root powder as well. We're going to do our yellow first. Now I pre-mixed the powder with a little bit of oil. And this is how you want to add it into it. You don't want to just put the straight powder right in there. So So I do about 1 tablespoon of like a simple oil, like canola oil. I used olive oil today, with about 1 teaspoon or so of the pigment. You can mix this by hand or the emulsion blender. I find it's a little bit easier to mix by hand when I'm doing it in this container, so I will just use a spatula to mix that yellow pigment in. And that looks pretty good. So we're gonna go on to our purple next, which I also pre-mixed with the oil here. So we're just gonna pour that in. And you'll see a little bit really does go quite a long way. So that's what that looks like in there. We're gonna go ahead and mix this one by hand as well. Now, if I wanted to get a thicker trace, I could use the stick blender again. So we'll see if this gets to where I need it to be. All right, so I do feel like I can make this a little bit thicker, so I am gonna go ahead and get this stick blender back in just for a few seconds or so. All right, that looks good. You'll notice when you use the stick blender, it does create a lot of air bubbles, so you do wanna kind of try and tap those out so that you don't get air bubbles in your soap. And we don't want to waste any, so let's make sure that we use our spatula to get all that soap off of this blender. All right, now it is time to pour our soap.